Welcome to Unexpected Points. I'm your host, Kevin Cole. I'm joined today. I was just saying earlier, this is Dak Day. So I'm so lucky to have RJ Ochoa here. He is the editor-in-chief of Blogging the Boys, an SB Nation blog on the Cowboys. He's been making the rounds. I'm glad he could make some time for me today. So emotions. I want to talk about emotions first, this emotional day. Where do you stand on the relief / excitement / maybe even dreading a little bit of having to hear about this contract and how it hampers the team whenever anything goes wrong in perpetuity?
Well, Kevin, appreciate you having me. Relief's a great word. I think the first word I thought of was peace. And you mentioned dread. I'm kind of like hyped for the dread. You know what I mean? Like we've had the
You've been through the battles. You've been through the battles.
Exactly. Like we've had the same arguments already, like for 2 years now, and why he's worth it, how he's better than quarterback X, quarterback Y. And a lot of those arguments have really aged well over time, especially, Carson Wentz is kind of, I think, the case in point. And so now I'm excited because I kind of feel like, like you ever have like a group of friends like that everybody got I don't have a PS5, been on the hunt forever. And, right. But like when I got a PS4, it was kind of like, oh, I understood like everything my friends were talking about. Like, this is super cool. I get it. And so now, like I saw the report on the day we're talking that the Baltimore Ravens are working through the Lamar Jackson discussions. Well, that sucks. Been there, done that. You know what I mean? So I'm happy to be on this side of the discussion. But there is an overwhelming sense of peace because in a very unique situation like this one, I think there was this sense that maybe this would have gone to the point that Dak would have not been a Cowboy in 2022. And that was really going to, I think, impact the way a lot of people root for this team, which would have been interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was pretty precarious along this lines. I mean, it was kind of the path of least resistance to get here, just being able to say, we're just going to do a franchise tag, we're going to do another franchise tag. But a lot of things came into place to now get this long-term deal. I mean, let's discuss the details here. Everyone wants to know the dollars and cents. Now, most people probably have heard of this here, but we're talking about, $40 million a year, a 4-year deal, $126 million in guarantees, which is the biggest that we've seen here. I think Deshaun Watson got $112 million in guarantees. The amount of money that Dak's going to earn over the next 3 years, I think, is really interesting. That's basically the guaranteed amount. And when you think about that versus Deshaun Watson's contract, now he's going to earn, I don't know, something like 70, 80 million over the next few years. Mahomes is only going to earn around 60 million over the next few years. So this is really comparable to like a Russell Wilson type of deal that we saw before, a veteran contract deal, a lot of money up front. Is there anything that Dak could have wanted that he did not get as part of this deal?
I don't think so. And I think, I mean, you've only discussed the deal that is now in place, right? You got $31.4 million last year on the tag. I mean, so if you look at it from that perspective, I mean, he got over $157 million guaranteed. And so, I think, we've kind of been exploring this angle at Blogging the Boys, like who won. And I think, the Cowboys win and that they have a top 5 quarterback for the foreseeable future. And ultimately that's what matters here. But Dak did win. And I know, as you do, that everybody has likened this situation to Kirk Cousins, and I think Kirk won too, and that he got the fully guaranteed deal in Minnesota. But Dak had a higher point of leverage in that he, I'm a big fan of Kirk, and I know you guys are as well, in that he's just a better quarterback. I mean, he wielded more power, more leverage in that sense. And so, I mean, this worked out incredibly for him. And I think that it was things that kind of went beyond his control, beyond the obvious, beyond the measurable, beyond who he is as in his own merit. Carson Wentz regressed, Jared Goff regressed, and their teams gave up on them, which further cemented this idea. Beyond that, Dak obviously got hurt, and the idea of how important he is at the Cowboys was really on full display. And I don't know if you would agree. I think the national narrative, you and I spoke actually this time a year ago about Mike McCarthy. And I mean, a year ago, I think people were still debating, he's not better than, whoever it was. But I do think that now I think it's well understood that he's in that group, however, what number you want to put on it, top 5, 6, 7, but he is part of that sort of sector of quarterbacks. And so in that sense, I mean, it was impossible not to give him everything he wanted.
Yeah. I mean, I think we have to go back to 2019. He came in as part of the 2016 class, which also included Ezekiel Elliott, which also included Jalen Smith. Those two guys got their extensions, and that's the earliest you can extend someone is after those 3 years, right? I believe it was that same season, DeMarcus Lawrence got his big deal. And then, what were they going to do with Dak? And I think that was when the discussion first started, obviously, when you could first figure out if you're going to sign him or not. I'm going to throw a couple of colleagues under the bus here, because I remember that's around the time that I was getting into it at PFF. And I think Eric Eager and George Jahuri, a couple of guys here who do the PFF forecast, they were very skeptical of signing Dak to a long-term contract. The thought being, I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but it was like, do we know Dak Prescott is a top 8-ish sort of quarterback? Do we know he's a difference maker? If we don't, then you play out that 4th year, you maybe do a franchise tag, you keep on going, and you see what happens. I think that sentiment is gone now for most people. I mean, you live in the reply land on Twitter, so I'm sure you're still getting lots of people who don't believe Dak is there. But the last year he played well. This year, from an efficiency standpoint, he actually probably wasn't as good as some people think, but
sure,
the volume was monstrous. And if anyone was, quote unquote, carrying the team, you could say that offense was carrying the team with what was going on this year. And the fact that Andy Dalton, who I think most of us knew was a limited quarterback, who came into the same situation. I mean, there were some problems in the offensive line. There's some other things that were going wrong there. Looked so bad, and the team was so bad without him. All of those things I feel like wrapped up together to really boost his standing, where it probably is the highest it's been since post-rookie year Dak.
Yeah, I think there is so much here, and that's why I'm glad we're having this discussion and kind of fleshing it all out. To your point, in 2019, Zeke gets his deal after he holds out, goes to Cowboys, everybody well knows. Jalen was kind of this surprise, and at the time, that was coming off the 2018 season when Jalen had played really well and really justified the risk the Cowboys took on him, next to Leighton Vander Esch, who had that great rookie season, hasn't been the same ever since. And so nobody had a real issue with that deal, and I think that's the way to do this. Another level of this is I don't fault the Rams or the Eagles for the Jared Goff or Carson Wentz deals, because had those quarterbacks hit, they would look like bargains right now. And so in that sense, I applaud the Cowboys for being proactive, just like they signed Lyle Collins that offseason as well. But you mentioned DeMarcus Lawrence. They had just applied the second franchise tag to him that offseason. They made him play out the 2018 season on the tag. They tagged him again in 2019, a very similar situation to this Dak Prescott one, and he needed shoulder surgery that offseason. He threatened not to get it until he got a deal which would delay his obviously start time for them. And so they caved. They blinked with him. They blinked with Zeke, and they suddenly developed these like moral principles when it came to the quarterback, which is, fundamentally not sound in any way, but still it's the way the Cowboys chose to operate. And I think what's more is like the narrative boosted all of the data, right? Because to your point, and I think another aspect is Dak started playing incredibly well the moment he started operating on one-year deals. 2019 was the final year of his rookie contract. He was incredible those first 3 games. Granted, they were against New York, Washington, and Miami. And so, then you get to this point where you ascribe the faults and the flaws of the Cowboys throughout the end of the 2019 season to Jason Garrett, right? And then, he's gone. And then the Mike McCarthy thing really kind of boosted the narrative once more. And then obviously he gets hurt. And I think a tipping point was the Cowboys lost to the Arizona Cardinals on Monday Night Football. It looked like a disaster this past season, their first game without Dak. And obviously that really kind of changed the conversation. And what's more is we have said for years that Dak is a really great leader on the Cowboys, and people have had a difficult time quantifying that. But the week after the Cowboys lost to Arizona, they went to Washington and just got destroyed by that incredible defensive front. And that was the game that Andy Dalton got hurt. And you'll recall it was a big story. No Cowboys offensive lineman got in John Bostic's face. And that really kind of accented that difference. And so you had all of this, data and objective fact that supported Dak Prescott as this franchise quarterback. And now it was so crystal clear that the entire team just kind of quit without him. And so that really kind of got us to where we are now, which is why I think was a big factor in the Cowboys ultimately blinking.
Yeah, I mean, 2019, okay, I could get it for a couple of reasons why the Cowboys may have passed at that point in time. Like I said, the reputation was not there. I have a higher reputation of Dak now than I did back then, despite the fact that he performed better if you take into account the rushing value that he had been generating his first few years. He's not a Lamar Jackson type of guy where you say, he's going to rush for 1,000 yards or something, but he's picking up critical first downs, critical short yardage situations, and being extremely efficient there. And that's something where in these metrics like QBR that really enhance. He was, a top 5 quarterback multiple times those first 3 years, which is surprising. You would have thought it was just that rookie season. So I can see that. The problem was last offseason. And the negotiations that went on there. Well, one other thing about 2019, I can see also why they passed, because he had a $2 million cap hit in 2019. So if you extend him, like you can't get under that. Like you're actually gonna be increasing your cap hit, and teams don't like to do that. And one of the reasons that we're seeing the timing that we're seeing now is because they want to get that cap hit down and use some of that, be able to have some of that money available. But last season, this whole thing that really, the 4 years versus the 5 years and the other things, what happened last offseason? Because that just seemed like the time that you had to get it done, because you could see this coming. You knew you were dead if you let this go on and a full year and play out the way that it did. So what happened then from your perspective?
I think it was a mix of hubris and arrogance. I mean, honestly, and I know that sounds impossible, but
Jerry Jones. We're talking about Jerry Jones, the Cowboys here, but yeah, go ahead.
But to that point, they've people love to say, oh, Jerry always gets the deal done. We're at free agency time of year, so people say, oh, Jerry will go spin big in free agency. It's what have you been watching? Like that's not who this team is. That the last big name free agent they went out and got where they spent big was Brandon Carr, and that was almost a decade ago. And so they operate very differently, and they're very frugal, and they're very cheap. And as evidenced, they went all the way to the 11th hour with DeMarcus Lawrence. They went to the 11th hour with Ezekiel Elliott. In terms of the clock that Zeke accelerated, and so they had to blink. And so I don't know. I think that they really believed. You've seen, all the discussions over the last 2 years as well, that, the Cowboys brand was a factor, right? Playing for the Cowboys is different, monetarily than it is playing for whoever else. And so, and in that sense, I think that narrative has worked against them as well. Like Patrick Mahomes has become this superstar in Kansas City of all places. And so all of the kind of uncontrollable things have worked in Dak's favor as well. And I think that, the Cowboys are very poor at projecting the market. They couldn't project it when it came to DeMarcus Lawrence. They projected it incorrectly when it came to Zeke Elliott. And that was, I think, a really important moment for the Cowboys, because I don't know if you would agree, but I think the running backs don't matter movement has picked up a lot of steam in the last 3 to 4 years specifically. And it may not have been as loud from a social media standpoint in 2016. And so fine, Cowboys, you want to make this, move of drafting Zeke, but doubling down on that 3 years later wasn't wise. And I think that in that moment, a lot of Cowboys fans begin to worry, from the perspective, okay, this is a team that really doesn't get it. And so, and we didn't even mention, Byron Jones was coming up. They literally let Amari Cooper hit free agency last year. That actually happened. And so they kind of let this and there was the 2 tag situation last year that was kind of hovering out there, and people thought they would use that to their benefit, but that was just something that sort of showed up in the last year of the CBA. And so I think they thought they would, they would out-bully, kind of intimidate Dak Prescott. And I think Todd France understood. He understood that the pending franchise tag values, once Dak got tagged, that was it. The moment Dak got tagged last year, the Cowboys were going to have to reach $40 million per year and over $123 million guaranteed. And that you're very smart and very astute, much more than I am. And
but it's not go that far.
But this isn't like quantum physics, right? Like we didn't crack some code. Like these numbers and these values were like open and available, and it was easy to do this math, the numbers that Dak Prescott could make over the coming years. And what's more is this trailblazer was already out there in the Kirk Cousins situation, and they just kind of ignored that. And I think that they procrastinated. They thought it would go away. And I also think that they are limited in their understanding. Last May, Stephen Jones did an interview with Mike Florio. And obviously this has been a subject that has been talked about for a long time. And he was asked about the Dak situation. He said, well, there's all sorts of analytics, is the buzziest word in the NFL. So there's all sorts of analytics that support if you pay your quarterback over a certain percentage of the salary cap, that you can't win a Super Bowl. And in that moment, I think a lot of Cowboys fans panicked, because Steven, this isn't even analytics. Like this isn't even coincidence. Like this is just a thing that you're saying out loud. And so I think it was this combination of misunderstanding, of hubris, of arrogance, and really underestimating Dak Prescott and the lengths that he was willing to go to get what he wanted.
Yeah, that number is like the bane of analytics guys' existence, because it's basically saying, what was Tom Brady's biggest cap hit, and let's add like 1% to it. And that's the number for some reason, because Tom Brady wins all the championships. So it's kind of hard for anyone else to get in there. But yeah, the whole thing about whether or not, there's obviously a point that a quarterback is like, you can't pay him too much money. But, some people will look at Carson Wentz and they'll look at Jared Goff and they'll say, these are reasons why you don't pay the quarterback. But in my view, I look at these guys and I say, you made an early commitment to both, right? You made it after the third year. You had the 5th-year option. You had this long window. I mean, how much damage did the Eagles really do by signing Wentz? Yeah, they paid out a little bit more money than they would have had to, but they could have ended up in this situation. And they traded him and they got draft capital back for him. I mean, and they got rid of him. And Goff, it's not ideal, but they were a team that was competing. They were a team that was in the playoffs this year. They could have been a team in the playoffs next year. I think people kind of underestimate how you can get out of these contracts as long as you're willing to take a dead money hit a couple of years into it, and you don't restructure. You don't restructure these deals a couple of years down the road. Dak Prescott's probably going to be headed there like Tony Romo was many times before. But I just feel like teams are sometimes, it's supposed to be less aggressive to say, we're going to let this thing play out and see what happens. We're not going to take a risk. But in a lot of ways, you're risking that the player plays well, and then you're in trouble for a long time now with this Dak deal. And that's one thing I want to point out is that he was able to get the 4 years. There's no extension on a 5th-year option and everything else. It's not a 6-year window like it was for these other guys extended after 3 years. 4 years from now. So that means 3 years from now, because you're not going to franchise tag him again. No trade clause. 3 years from now, you're going to be back negotiating with Dak Prescott again for another huge signing bonus and another big extension. I mean, this is something that could affect the Cowboys for the next decade.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you so much. And I think the weird point of contradiction is like, and you get these like fans, right? The fans of the Rams, the Eagles, or whatever, that you're almost like, you don't realize it, but you're rooting against the player, right? Like in say, like you're like, so you should envision the best case scenario. And so in that world, like, what's the best way to operate? And so the mistake I would say that the Rams franchise has made recently is paying Todd Gurley. And I do think that opened this like Pandora's box, because all of a sudden Zeke Elliott gets paid and Christian McCaffrey and Alvin Kamara and Dalvin Cook. But it was smart. And to your point, if you are creative enough, and we've seen this with the Eagles twice over, like in regimes from the Chip Kelly era, if you're creative enough, you can get out of anything you want. And what's the like worst case scenario? You have to pay money, like as a multi-billion-dollar organization. That's fine, and I don't think that's a big deal. But yeah, and I think it is fascinating, to consider that Dak could be among the highest earners in NFL history, given that he was on a 4th-round rookie contract for 4 years. But this worked out really well for him, and he got the level of control he wanted, and he's on a similar timeline now with the kind of core of the Cowboys. Kellen Moore got a 3-year extension. Dan Quinn got a 3-year deal. If the Cowboys do restructure Amari Cooper's contract, as a lot of people anticipate, that will put him on kind of a 2-year time frame with them. CeeDee Lamb's obviously on his rookie deal, and so Dak's going to be here for the next wave of who the Cowboys are as an overall team. And so he is set up quite well. It's really difficult, I think, to find another player who has won as much against his team in negotiations while not crippling the team like Dak Prescott has.
Yeah. You hear a lot when the Cousins deal is being similar. I mean, I think that, the similarities are they're both later round picks, right? Both 4th-round picks, I believe. So maybe their teams weren't fully sold on him for that reason. I think there's always this weird, sunk cost that you've put into them. When you talk about Ezekiel Elliott, you talk about Amari Cooper, you talk about those guys. There was a sunk cost that they put into them to having to extend them. So that's Jalen Smith too, as an early 2nd-round pick, right, and someone who turned around. So that's part of it. But I do think when people say that like Dak bet on himself, I think that is true. But at the same time, it's this dynamic that you were mentioning about rooting against your quarterback, where in a ways you have the Cowboys and others are almost betting against their quarterback by not making this deal. It's like they almost lost betting against Dak more than I think Dak betting on himself, because if a team really wants to extend a quarterback after that 3rd year, it happens. Like they just get it done. Patrick Mahomes, it got done. Deshaun Watson, it got done. If Baker Mayfield was playing well enough, it'll get done. Like Josh Allen, that will probably get done. It's almost like it's more, I think, on the Cowboys side than on Dak's side for refusing these contract offers that he was given.
No, and to that point, if we rewind a year, or maybe 10 or so months, 9 months, whatever it is, when he was July 15th of last year when he's officially on the tag. So at that point, on July 14th, if you're the Cowboys, you're debating, okay, we're going to send this dude into a franchise tag year. where we're willingly giving him Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and now CeeDee Lamb, and we've extended Blake Jarwin. So like, what's your two goals here are like seemingly to win the negotiations with Dak Prescott, but also to win the Super Bowl. And like those things don't marry and they don't merge. If the Cowboys had won the Super Bowl this past year for whatever reason, I mean, this deal we're talking about would have been astronomical. I mean, this deal is what it is with Dak Prescott not even playing 5 full games. And so it is insanely stupid in that, capacity that they didn't even like bet against themselves. They hedged against themselves in a number of different ways, to your point, with sunk costs as well. And so, I mean, it's fascinating that they operate that way, but this is who they are. I mean, they did a very similar thing with DeMarcus Lawrence, as mentioned. And so it's frustrating. I mean, we're all celebrating that this is finally done, but it is troubling given that this is who this front office is. I mean, this is a situation. The Cowboys, to your, this had the most enviable financial situation of any NFL team from the moment they realized Dak Prescott was their starter. And they never took advantage of it, like not once. I mean, they signed Cedric Thornton and, Benson Mayowa, Nolan Carroll, and Daryl Worley. And yeah, they took a swing on Gerald McCoy last year and that didn't work out, unfortunately, but they never got it. And they still don't get it, as evidenced by the fact that it took this long. I will give them credit for getting this done ahead of the tag deadline, but they should have gotten that done ahead of the tag deadline last year when they could have placed the tag on Amari Cooper or Byron Jones. Everything is a bit of a year too late for them.
Yeah. And like I was saying earlier, the timing for this year, again, this is when this couldn't be a Zeke thing where they're going to let it play out to the end, because if they create the cap space, they want to have that cap space to make sure they don't have to, release too many players. They don't have anyone they can bring in free agency. So that's definitely a part of it. One other thing that I want to talk about when you talk about the Cowboys not being big spenders, I think sometimes there's this thing with free agency, and I've seen it out there a bunch of saying, you spend in free agency, you lose in a way. And I think there's a little bit of a correlation, causation, reversal going on here. The Cowboys have drafted well. They've drafted well, so they don't really have to go into free agency that much. Like you mentioned, they let Byron Jones go. They let a player like that go, and they sign other people. So in a way, it's like if you're a losing team, that's because you haven't drafted well, so you don't have players to spend money on to re-sign them, so you spend money in free agency, which is not the best place to spend money, but that's the reason you're spending money in free agency. I mean, the Jets have all this money to spend in free agency, and they're going to spend free agents because they stunk at drafting. Right. And when they're bad, it's going to be because they stunk at drafting, not because they're spending money on free agents and so on. So I think there is a thing here where the Cowboys, I'm not sure they aren't aggressive still. They've drafted pretty well though, and had the ability to sign their own guys. And they've done some gross, like I said, restructuring with Tony Romo's contract and some other things before that have gone poorly. So it'll be interesting to see how they can play it out going forward. And I think that's the question, right? Like, what is this team going to be? Let's just say, forget the fact whether Dak's taking up 15% of the cap, 20% of the cap, whatever it ends up being. Like, is this a team that can compete now in 2021? Without having to nail every draft pick and every signing that every guy that they happen to bring in on a pretty modest amount?
I think they are. And I think, maybe this is just part of being the Cowboys. It's a bit of luck. I think if the Cowboys were in the NFC West, I don't know that the answer is the same thing. But the NFC East is terrible, right? And I don't have any betting odds in front of me. I haven't gotten any emailed to me, shockingly, yet. But I mean, they're going to be the odds-on favorites to win the NFC East, right? Like easily. And what's more is we now live in an NFL that features 3 wildcard teams. And so there's zero question that they're going to be a playoff team. What's more is they play in the weaker conference, right? I mean, certainly, they're dealing with the Buccaneers, who, I think some lines of logic would say are probably going to regress to some degree in 2021. The Packers, I think I wrote something from Blogging the Boys that'll be out later on Tuesday afternoon. I mean, how many quarterbacks in the NFC over the life of Dak's contract would you take over Dak? Because Aaron Rodgers is the only one that I would confidently say, and even then, like, there's logic to taking Dak over him.
Aaron's like, what is he, 37 years old, 38 years old, something like that? Yeah, so yeah, he's getting up there.
So yeah, I mean, I've just, as a Cowboys fan, I've learned not to bet against Aaron Rodgers, but certainly if you want to take Dak over him, I can find logic to support that. And so all that being said, I do think that they're in an era to compete now. And I think that's why this was so important to get done. You know, we talked to Emmitt Smith on the SB Nation NFL show during the week leading up to the Super Bowl. And he said something that I couldn't believe he, of all people, said. You know, people have said forever that maybe the Cowboys were sort of, sort of stretching this whole thing out to stay in the news and stay relevant. And like Emmitt Smith thought that. And, you know, it's one thing for us to think it, but, you know, like for Emmitt Smith to think it really kind of, you know, troubled me a little bit. And he also said that the longer this played out, the longer it was going to be this question. And every time any Cowboy does any media appearance or whatever the case may be, it has always been for 2 years now, what is the situation with Dak? And really, if you think about it, every offseason for Dak, and part of this is being the Cowboys, has featured some level of controversy, I suppose. In 2017, Tony Romo retired. So, okay, you're officially the dude. Also, that was the Ezekiel Elliott suspension, you know, will they, won't they, back and forth forever. 2018, they released Dez Bryant. Jason Witten retired. And Dez certainly had some thoughts. And then ever since then, every offseason has been about Dak's pending negotiations. And so this is now kind of, you know, coming above water for the first time in like 4 years to some degree. And so I think there's a sense of peace. And I think that was really needed for this team that really had a lot of their spirit broken without him last year. And so now there's zero question. There's zero doubt. There's no more like awkwardness. Well, he's in the building, but he's not under contract, whatever the case may be. And I think that this was important for Mike McCarthy, who I know you guys have supported a lot as well, because it wouldn't have made sense, you know, and this I think does line up with, can they have success now? I mean, they hired Mike McCarthy as opposed to, say, a Matt Rule, because they did view themselves as closer rather than further apart. And so they bring in Mike McCarthy, they extend Kellen Moore, like all of their goals and their missions were lined up with a particular window in mind. And so, I mean, I think, and this is one way we've kind of put it to our audience as far as evaluating whether this was smart or not by the Cowboys. If you had to design a path for them to win a Super Bowl in the next 4 years, I don't think there's any question that the best possible ones involve Dak as the quarterback.
Yeah. And I'm looking here. I don't know if these are up to date. These might be a little bit old here. It looks like these are quite old. But yeah. The Cowboys are probably the odds-on favorite here. I don't think they've posted it for this year, but it's been on pause for a while. So that makes sense that they would be the favorite to win the division there. And yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I think, God, NFL fans in the NFL is glad to see Dak Prescott back and not have to worry about quarterback X ruining our late window of NFL games, of which the Cowboys dominate. I mean, the Cowboys are a force. Yeah, it's weird to think the Cowboys would need more attention. Like, is there such a thing? That seems like galaxy brain sort of situation there.
To that point, and this was something I've written a lot. I'm just living off of Diet Cokes and Chick-fil-A at this point. It's really it's a lot of. We were talking before we started recording. This is so much fun. Like, I really do enjoy it, but. I don't know if you remember this. Maybe some people forget. The Cowboys were flexed off of Sunday Night Football this past year. Their game against the 49ers, the Browns-Giants game was chosen instead. That had never happened in the history of Sunday Night Football in its current form. NBC took over in 2006. And so, I mean, to that point, I mean, Dak is a necessary superstar. You know, like this is like going to see Wicked on Broadway with, you know, Idina Menzel absent for the night. You know, like you're just like, this isn't worth it. You know, and so no disrespect to any understudy. And so, in that sense, they need.
Yeah, I don't think they're listening to this podcast.
Right.
Just in case you're wondering.
I know they're big PFF fans over at Wicked, but yeah, and so I mean, they really hit a low point, like not just in the football sense of it all, but in that sense, I mean, they were forgotten about, they were dismissed. And a lot of that is that other teams really popped, and there are a lot of other great storylines like the Browns. But I mean, without him, they do lack a huge sense of just kind of identity. And so I think it really has been important. I wonder if you get time, or if any of your listeners get time, the first press conference he did at the beginning of last season at training camp, I thought he just had such a command, because there was obviously all the talk about him being on the tag. And he just walked in with this different energy, and really he's different in that sense. And I don't like to fall too much into the just narrative of it all, but he really is a different person, and very different from any player I've ever seen or covered.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I talked about this a little bit, but maybe we can dig in a little bit further into what this means for the rest of the quarterback. So when you look at the landscape, and I mentioned you mentioned Jackson and what's going to be going on there, which is surprisingly maybe not as much of a slam dunk as
Right.
we would have thought for a former unanimous MVP. We have Josh Allen, Baker Mayfield there. I mean, what is your opinion on what these teams should do? I guess I kind of already show my cards a little bit that I think that they should extend if they can. But then the question would also be at what price, because it's tough to imagine that anyone can look at it and say, I mean, maybe you could have said versus Deshaun Watson that, Deshaun Watson's a little bit better player, so I don't deserve that type of money. But we're going on, a year after that contract's been signed, and now we have Dak beating that contract. And I think someone like Josh Allen, whether it's true or not, can point to the fact to say like, "Hey, I'm a better quarterback than Dak Prescott." Again, I'm not saying that's true, but I'm saying you could probably credibly make that argument, or at least amongst the fans of the Bills will believe that.
Yeah, and I think even if they're not, I mean, that's the going rate. Like that's the way all this works. And in an interesting way, Dak's negotiations, I think, were more from the Cowboys' perspective related to the franchise tag values associated with him, not necessarily the quarterback market. But so in that sense, Dak's deal has nothing to do with the quarterback market, but the future quarterback market will have everything to do with his deal. And so I mean, I don't see any reason why, and I think it's fascinating that Lamar, Baker, and Josh Allen are all coming off of their first playoff wins. And Josh Allen obviously had two, and one of them was against Lamar. And so in that sense, I mean, I would be, really nervous, and I've been nervous. That's what I'm saying. Like, this is awesome. Like, I can't wait to watch this from this vantage point. But I think the most pressing one to take care of is clearly Josh Allen, obviously. But I could certainly make an argument for Lamar Jackson. I mean, he's got a resume point that nobody else in that conversation does. And so that clearly is going to inflate and be a factor in his costs. And so I do wonder if there ever was a reasoning, because I think we both agree generally, if you have a first round quarterback that has justified themselves as a franchise player after their third year, you would want to extend them. But given the diminished salary cap this year, I do wonder if there is some sense in logic to just, because you do have 2 more years left on these rookie contracts, let alone a franchise tag situation. But I mean, I do wonder if there's logic in waiting 1 more year. But, I know the take is out there that Jerry Jones clearly must know something about the pending television contracts, which is why he felt so comfortable doing this. I mean, with that on the horizon, I would also want to beat that if I was any of these teams, because the moment that figure comes out and the moment the 2022 salary cap can be approximated in any fashion, I mean, the reality for your client is going to go way up. And so I think they all deserve to get new deals. And I actually hope that happens. And I think next year, Kyler Murray is going to get a new deal. And the year after that, Joe Burrow. Like it never ends.
Yeah. I mean, I get the difference there being these guys have the 5th year option with these guys as first rounders. And that ended up being like really, really important if you think about it, because it was really this tipping point between getting from the first to the second tag that unlocked everything and made it such a big negotiation. So if you have that extra year, maybe there's some logic in that. I don't know if I buy that Jerry Jones knows what's going to happen. We all know what's going to happen. It's going to go up. The deals are going to be big, they were in a bad spot. They were in a bad spot. I think that's probably it more than anything else. I guess Baker would be the guy where I just don't know. I just don't know if anyone's going to take a discount, a quote unquote discount on this, because this Dak contract, now that it comes in, yeah, I mean, you figure it's just weird because, okay, so Patrick Mahomes, let me talk about this for a second here. I was arguing that I thought that Deshaun Watson's deal in ways was better than Patrick Mahomes' deal because of the fact that he's just not getting that much cash up front. I mean, he was barely getting anything. He was keeping that cap hit down. I mean, I mentioned he was only getting about $60 million over the first 3 years of the deal to keep that cap hit down, and eventually goes up. I mean, this Dak contract is way better than Patrick Mahomes' deal. And how quickly is the entire quarterback market going to turn over into being Dak contracts? which is, it's just weird to think that the Chiefs somehow could be like in a relatively good contract position at the quarterback position within a couple of years.
Yeah, and I think that that's a benefit of the length of the extension as well. And I think, that's if you factor in the franchise tag value, I mean, Dak Prescott, the $31 million last year, he got more guaranteed money than Mahomes for 5 years of service, so to speak. And so I do think, it is interesting in that we both agree, and I know the consensus is that Dak won. Dak got this great deal. Dak played it right, et cetera. But it doesn't, cripple the Cowboys. Like, they have flexibility, and some, people are pointing to the flexibility in the here and now, and that's literally been the point all along, right? Like, that's been the point. Like, get it done now, and the sooner you have a long-term agreement in place, the sooner you can, extend things and spread things out. Like, that's not like, revelatory or anything, but the voidable years are interesting. And I do think that that's where the Cowboys won in that they have flexibility. Not that they pulled one over Dak, but I do wonder if that's the archetype for future deals, for the Bills and the Ravens and the Browns, so to speak. Hey, we'll give you all this cash. We'll give you all this money. We'll give you all this guaranteed, but we need those voidable years so that we can continue to build in the here and now. And I think especially for those players, because they're still on their rookie contract figures, at least for the next 2 years while they're on their 5th-year option before the financial figures from the extension ultimately kicks in.
I mean, it's my understanding, though, with the voidable years that, like, I don't think there's a negative from a player perspective. Right. I think they're just spreading out the signing bonus hit over more years. So I think this year you're probably going to see it a lot more because you're specifically trying to lower the 2021 number, which because of the cap being lower. So I could see that being utilized more. I'm trying to think of when it's been used before. I guess, does Brady have it on his deal? I don't remember if he has it on his deal. Wentz had it on his deal, I think. So it's normally teams that are up against the cap that are going to be using it.
Right. I know the only one that comes to mind is just recently. I know Zach Ertz had some dummy years in his contract as well.
Yeah, the Eagles were doing that, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but again, a team that was kind of up against it in a salary cap situation as well. But in that sense, I mean, because I think quickly, these teams will get there because they are in these situations where they can add. And I think that's where I think we kind of, things get lost, but I know, the Bears have tagged Allen Robinson, but I mean, the Bears went for it at least more than the Cowboys did under Mitchell Trubisky's, rookie window. And the Chiefs certainly went for it in signing Sammy Watkins. We know the Rams went for it. And so that was an avenue the Cowboys never explored. And so in that sense, I do think that it could provide at least the one potential path. Like there's no impossibilities, I guess my point, for Baltimore, Buffalo, or Cleveland to go for it now that if they do extend their quarterbacks, because there is that room to kind of wiggle and get creative.
Okay, now we talked about the NFC East a little bit. Maybe we can dig into it a little bit more here, because now with Dak in the fold, it really just comes down to the other teams don't have a quarterback, basically. Right. I mean, Daniel Jones, supposedly he was given the dreaded vote of confidence today by the Giants. So, but is anyone really in the market to be able to go up and get a quarterback in this year where every single team is being mocked a quarterback? There are some other options floating around, but it seems like Daniel Jones is going to be is going to be in New York. In Washington, it's wide open, but who will end up there? I don't know. Ryan Fitzpatrick or something. Like, I don't know who's going to end up in Washington. And then you go over to Philadelphia, and the most recent news is that they want to build around Jalen Hurts, which to me is like a euphemism for maybe we want to just tank the season. But they're already pretty far up. Where are they? 7th, I think they're drafting this year. 6th?
I think they're 6th. Yeah,
6th. So that's in the neighborhood. And if a Trey Lance or someone comes down to them, who knows? Maybe they end up pulling the trigger. I mean, is there any team that you look at and you say, maybe that is the biggest threat to the Cowboys going forward? I mean, I guess I would say the Washington, if they can get someone in quarterback, would maybe fit that mold. But what do you think?
It's interesting. After the Thanksgiving Day loss that the Cowboys had to Washington, that, I know that they still ultimately bounced back when they beat, Cincinnati. I know they still lost to Baltimore, but they re-entered the conversation after that. But that was a really low point on the season. And that was when I think a lot of people, full on team tank, whatever the case may be. And in that moment, I had a conversation with my colleague, Brandon Lee Gouton from SB Nation's Eagles site, Bleeding Green Nation. And we talked about the NFC East as a whole, because the Eagles were obviously in a downward trend trend as well. And we both picked Washington as the ideal winner of the division, in the sense that it would keep them the furthest back from a draft position, because I do believe in the overall sort of general state of their roster. I do believe that Ron Rivera is no longer, they don't have a disaster of a head coaching situation is the ultimate point. And so in that sense, yeah, like I don't see any practical option for them that makes them a true and legitimate threat. And even if you split the series against them, I mean, the fact I don't put a lot of stock into first place schedules, but they will have to play the Packers, where the Cowboys will play the Vikings. They will have to play the Bills if the 17th game does get added, where the Cowboys will play the Patriots. Not that that's a walk in the park, but those things I think are relevant factors. And so, even if they split that series, I don't see any way where the Cowboys wouldn't win the NFC East almost by Christmas. I mean, that they do figure to be the, heavy favorite. And in fact, like, is there a division? Because we both agree the Cowboys are favorites. Is there a division where the perceived favorite is larger than the Cowboys in the NFC East? Because I would even argue that the Chargers present a larger threat just because of who they are to the Chiefs than Washington does to the Cowboys, at least in their current format with Taylor Heineke.
Yeah. I mean, and the Raiders have shown some competency, and the Broncos, I think they're another team where, similar to Washington in some ways, where if they have just competent quarterback play, they can start to do things, and they have a great home field advantage there and everything else. So yeah, no, I think they're up there. I'm trying to think of where else. It's really tough because the AFC is now, as I said, flip side of that quarterback question that you were talking about, of who would you want in the NFC over Dak, and that's because you have all these guys in the AFC right now. So I think that pretty clearly is the largest leader of that team. Now, what do the Cowboys need to do though to solidify this team and move forward? I mean, you're going to hope that on the defensive side, you're going to get some natural regression, and you're like, you just can't be this bad 2 years in a row, even with the same players, even with no improvement. You're going to hope that you get better there. But is that going to be the focal point? Because there's like the offensive line has been really the mainstay for them for a long time, and whether or not that will need to be solidified and just say, forget the defense. We're just going to hope we can bring in some players and put it together there, piece it together, maybe have a better scheme fit than we did last year.
Well, I think the last point of help on offense that's necessary is swing tackle depth. And the Cowboys are in a unique position in that, I guess both of their swing tackle candidates, Brandon Knight and Terrence Steele, while both young, undrafted free agents, got a lot of experience. I mean, it's a really rare thing that you have young, experienced swing tackles on a team, I think. And so that's a nice commodity, but still, I mean, if Rashawn Slater or Penei Sewell fall to them, I think a perfect world is that they're both there, that some combination of that, or Caleb Farley or Patrick Surtain are there with the 10th overall pick, and they can trade down and build up some more assets and ultimately land a couple of contributors. But defensively, obviously they've moved on to Dan Quinn from Mike Nolan, and kind of getting back to that scheme that made the Seattle Seahawks so renowned for so long. And that was the defensive scheme they ran in 2018 under Chris Richard and Rod Marinelli that did see them have success. And so, I mean, I think to your point, I mean, it's hard to just be that consistently bad. And so you should expect some positive, sort of boost there. But I think that, they need points of depth. And I guess to go back to the point of aggression in roster building, that's where I think that they've gotten complacent. They relied, we're kind of guilty of, I guess, falling into the hype of it all, but they relied on Jalen Smith, Leighton Vander Esch, and Sean Lee as their linebacking core. And Jalen is this player who came off of an injury that literally tested his ability to ever play football again, and was really poor in 2019. Leighton Vander Esch has had his injury concerns ever since his incredible rookie season, and Sean Lee has always been Sean Lee. And so, you can't just hope and pray that that's going to work out and that you're going to get 16 games from, all of them, and it's all going to be great. I think in the secondary, I would love to see them bring back one of Chidobe Awuzie or Jordan Lewis. I would love to see them go add, we have this conversation all the time. People say, well, I would love them to sign Richard Sherman or Patrick Peterson and kick them out to safety. Why? just sign them to play corner. Like, you know, like they have Trayvon Diggs, who really showed a lot of promise last year, obviously. And they have Anthony Brown, who's a okay veteran. But so, I mean, I think doing something, they could very quickly turn that really just spotlighted weakness into a point of somewhat durability. I think, you know, their defensive front, they've obviously got DeMarcus Lawrence, who I think a lot of people believe in. I will be interested to see if they let Aldon Smith walk, but they do have Randy Gregory returning. They didn't play Bradley and Nye all too much last year. So they have these like projects. And then along the interior, I mean, Neville Gallimore played really well. I know he was a player that a lot of people were high on entering the draft process, and they landed him in the 3rd round. Tristan Hill, their 2nd round pick in 2019, was really playing well before he tore his ACL in the same game that Dak Prescott was lost in. And so I think another fascinating thing is whether or not they bring Gerald McCoy back, but they just need more than bodies, but they need bodies, so to speak. They need points of depth that they can legitimately count on, because they don't have that. And so, you know, when the plan is compromised in any way, shape, or form, so to speak, they're completely lost, and they depend on Dak Prescott to throw them out of games. And he's talented enough to at least make it interesting, but that's not sustainable. And that's why they end up playing down to the competition that even is the lowly NFC East.
Yeah. I mean, like, again, it was one of these weird things where Dak didn't play that well, but because they relied on him and he had to throw so much in that last season, that his rep got to step up. So it was really interesting. Well, RJ, I think I'm going to let you go. This was fantastic. I appreciate everything that you're able to bring here to the discussion. I congratulate you on not having to hear months and months of this. And it's also nice. Yeah, it's nice to be in the NFC East, because I'm telling you, you get into the playoffs, you get that home game week 1, you know, you never know what can happen. So I think this should be a fun year for Cowboys fans.
Well, I appreciate you having me, and I agree. Certainly excited, and again, that sense of peace that like the Cowboys aren't going to ruin football for us, you know, like that, because that was on the table for a little bit. And I think, you know, you mentioned it earlier, but Dak is this sort of really well-liked player. I don't know of many, you know, non-Cowboys fans that aren't at least, you know, admirers of who he is as a person. And so I'm really excited to watch. This does feel, this feels like a great like movie. We've been like when episode 7, you know, was like first teased, you know, we had to wait like forever about it. Like I kind of feel like that. And so I'm really, really pumped about it to get to watch this. It's really unique. And the Cowboys are showing some signs of competency. So I'm excited to see if that continues to evolve. But thanks a lot for having me. I really appreciate it. It was fun.
Yeah. With Dak, one last thing on Dak. I think Dak, more than anyone else, probably in the NFL, I feel like he could be the person you put out there and you say, do you like Dak Prescott? And you probably know more about someone than any other player in the NFL, if you're going to say whether you're pro or anti-Dak. So this is a pro Dak podcast, and that's why we have you on, and continue to be a pro Dak Twitter account too. And so, of course, follow you on Twitter at RJ Ochoa, and then also blogging the boys. Thanks so much, RJ.